The test that changed everything. Maria Elena had always believed that love, strength, and hope could defy any odds. But nothing in her wildest dreams could have prepared her for the devastating reality that awaited her. The day she learned she was pregnant with her fourth child, she thought her world was about to bloom with happiness, a family that would finally fill the emptiness she'd been carrying for so long. But it wasn't that simple. At 32, Maria had already experienced the heart-wrenching pain of 3 miscarriages, each one leaving her more broken than the last. She'd come to a place where she had begun to doubt whether she would ever be able to give birth to a healthy child. Yet, when she found out she was pregnant again, the hope she'd been holding on to came rushing back. Carlos, her husband, stood beside her throughout every heartache, through every miscarriage, and every medical test. He was the pillar she leaned on, the man she trusted with everything she had. He was also excited about this new pregnancy, despite the risks the doctors had made clear. Maria's doctor warned her that the chances of complications were high, but Maria kept believing that this time would be different. After all, it had to be, didn't it? With each passing day, her belly grew round, and so did her anticipation. She couldn't help but wonder what this little soul would be like. Every night, she would talk to her baby, telling it about the world that awaited, about how much she and Carlos had dreamt of this day. The nursery was ready, a beautiful, soft, lilac-colored room that smelled of new beginnings. She had even picked a name, Valentina, which meant strength and courage, qualities that Maria believed her baby would need to survive the challenges ahead. As the weeks wore on, the pregnancy took its toll on her body, but her resolve never wavered. Maria was a woman who could endure anything, and she was willing to fight for her child. Carlos, ever by her side, constantly reassured her that everything would be okay. "Valentina is strong," he would tell her, "just like you." The anticipation grew, and Maria found herself dreaming of the day when she would finally hold her daughter in her arms. She pictured the moment vividly, the soft cry, the warmth of her baby's skin, the overwhelming sense of accomplishment. Then, one cold December night, Maria woke up with a sharp pain in her abdomen. It was unlike anything she had experienced before. Her heart raced in her chest as she clutched her stomach, a mix of anxiety and excitement swirling within her. Carlos immediately woke up and rushed to her side. His face was filled with concern, but he did his best to remain calm, helping Maria get dressed and guiding her to the car. "I think it's time," Maria whispered through clenched teeth. The journey to the hospital felt like an eternity. The cold streets of San Miguel de Allende passed by in a blur as Carlos gripped the steering wheel, trying to reassure Maria that everything would be fine. The pain seemed to intensify with every mile, and though Carlos said the words, Maria could feel his anxiety through the tremble in his voice. As they arrived at the hospital, Maria's mother, Isabel, was already there, waiting to take her daughter's hand and offer some semblance of calm. Isabel's smile was a comfort, but Maria couldn't shake the fear gnawing at her. She was about to face a challenge that seemed insurmountable, but she kept telling herself, "This time will be different. This time, we will bring our daughter home." The hospital room was sterile, cold, and buzzing with the sounds of machines. Maria was exhausted. Her body ached in places she didn't know existed. Carlos, in his scrubs, held her hand with a firm grip, trying to be the steady one. The baby's heartbeat, which had been so strong and reassuring in previous appointments, was now distant in Maria's mind as the pain intensified. The delivery was difficult. Maria, in a fog from the anesthesia, tried to focus on the reassuring voice of Dr. Salgado, the obstetrician who had been her doctor throughout the pregnancy. But it was hard to hold on to anything as her mind swam in and out of consciousness. Carlos kept whispering words of encouragement in her ear, his own nerves barely contained. But then, the moment they had been waiting for, the first cry of their baby girl. It was a sound they would never forget, but it was a sound that was short-lived. The crying stopped suddenly, and the room fell into an unsettling silence. The joy that had filled Maria's heart moments before was now replaced with confusion and fear. Dr. Salgado looked at the baby with a deep frown. He quickly carried the infant out of the room, telling Carlos and Maria to stay calm, that everything would be fine. But nothing about this situation seemed fine. Outside the room, Maria's mother, Isabel, watched with a growing sense of dread as Dr. Salgado returned, carrying the baby in his arms. His expression told a story she wasn't ready to hear. And then, with a heavy heart, the doctor spoke the words that would shatter the world they had been carefully building. "Maria," he said gently, "I'm afraid we couldn't save her. She didn't make it." Isabel couldn't hold back her tears as the news hit her like a ton of bricks. Her daughter had fought so hard, and now Maria's greatest joy was slipping through her fingers. But it wasn't over yet. Isabel's attention shifted as a sound from the back of the room caught her ear. It was the faintest cry, the softest wail of another baby. It was then that Isabel's world tilted on its axis. The unexpected miracle. Maria had felt the pain coming in waves. Each contraction seemed to come faster than the last, and her breath quickened with every breath. But it wasn't the labor itself that terrified her. It was the overwhelming weight of uncertainty. The worry that had been building up throughout the pregnancy now threatened to consume her. Was her baby going to be okay? What would they face once the baby arrived? Carlos, ever her rock, was there, holding her hand and whispering comforting words, though his own eyes revealed the cracks in his facade. He too was scared of the unknown. He had done everything to stay calm and collected for Maria, but as the situation grew increasingly tense, he felt helpless. The quiet hospital room was filled only with the soft hum of machines and the rush of Maria's quickened breath. As Dr. Salgado and the team prepared for the birth, Maria's mind kept racing. The fear and hope mixed within her, and her body responded by trembling with each tightening of her abdomen. This time, I will hold my daughter," she thought, her mind grasping at anything to maintain some sense of hope. And then the moment arrived. Maria could hear the doctors around her speaking quickly, but it felt distant, muffled by the overwhelming noise in her head. The moment the baby's cry broke the tension in the room, it was as though the world had finally shifted back into focus. But that relief was short-lived. The cry, the sound they had been desperately waiting for, faded too quickly. In an instant, the room went still, and all Maria could hear were the hurried footsteps of nurses and the soft sounds of medical professionals scrambling. She felt the coldness of fear settling into her chest as she searched Carlos's eyes, trying to read the message there. He couldn't hide the worry that etched deep into his face. Dr. Salgado was at the baby's side immediately, looking down at the newborn with a growing concern. He signaled for the nurses to wheel the baby away, and in the span of just a few moments, they were gone. Carlos stood frozen, rooted to the floor, the shock starting to take over. Maria's pulse quickened as she looked up at him, unable to speak, but wanting nothing more than to be reassured that everything was fine. Minutes passed like hours. "Is she okay?" Maria finally whispered, her voice a mere breath, her words shaking with uncertainty. Carlos opened his mouth to speak, but was interrupted by the door to the delivery room opening. Dr. Salgado, looking more somber than ever, stepped into the room, the weight of the news he carried apparent in his eyes. He walked over to Maria and sat at her bedside, his movements slow and deliberate. A tight knot formed in Maria's chest as she braced herself for what was coming. "We did everything we could," Dr. Salgado said quietly, his voice thick with sorrow. "She didn't make it. I'm so sorry." The words struck Maria like a physical blow. Her world, which had seemed so full of hope just moments ago, now felt like it was crashing down around her. She wanted to scream, to deny it, to fight against the cruel fate that had robbed her of the chance to hold her daughter. The tears came, not in great bursts, but in slow, uncontrollable drips that soaked the sheets beneath her. Carlos held her tightly, his face buried in her hair as he too cried, unable to find comfort in this unbearable loss. But just as the sorrow began to settle into the pit of Maria's stomach, there was a sound, a soft cry, distant but unmistakable. Maria's heart jolted in her chest as she listened. It was faint, but it was real. Isabel, her mother, who had been standing in the corner of the room, watching everything unfold in horror, heard it too. She stood still for a moment, her mind processing the situation with a speed that was almost unnatural. Her maternal instincts kicked in, and she turned toward Dr. Salgado, a look of quiet desperation on her face. "Doctor, what's that sound?" she asked, her voice trembling. Dr. Salgado hesitated, his face drawn with exhaustion and sorrow. But before he could answer, the sound came again, louder, clearer. It was unmistakable. A baby crying. Isabel's heart skipped a beat. Could it be another child? Her eyes widened, and without thinking, she moved toward the source of the sound. Dr. Salgado followed her, though his footsteps were reluctant, heavy with the weight of what had just occurred. They moved into the small side room, a space where unused medical equipment was stored, and in the far corner, near a crib, they found something that defied all understanding. There in the crib was a baby who was alive, crying weakly but steadily. Isabel gasped, stepping forward in disbelief. The baby was small, wrapped tightly in a soft white blanket. She could see its chest rising and falling, the movement of life that shouldn't have been possible. The baby looked healthy, despite its premature state. Dr. Salgado stood behind Isabel, looking down at the child in stunned silence. This doesn't make sense," he whispered. Isabel's mind raced. There was no explanation that made sense to her. The baby they had just tried to save, Maria's daughter, hadn't survived, but this baby was here, alive. The other baby. Isabel muttered under her breath, still struggling to come to terms with what she was seeing. It was never meant to be. She looked down at the baby in the crib, still crying softly. The room, once filled with grief, now felt suffused with the faintest sliver of hope. It didn't make sense, but Isabel knew that somehow this child was going to change everything. But then came the questions. Who was this child? Where had it come from? Why was it here, in a hospital room meant for Maria's loss? For a brief moment, Isabel's mind raced to a memory. A time when Maria had talked about wanting to adopt a child. A moment when Isabel had wondered if perhaps her daughter would find peace in another child, one who could fill the hole left by her losses. But this wasn't just adoption. This wasn't just another baby. It was a mystery that was unfolding in front of them, one that was much bigger than Isabel had expected. A mystery that would change Maria's life forever. Back in the recovery room, Maria was still lying in bed, still grappling with the pain of her loss, when the door opened again. Isabel entered, carrying the tiny baby wrapped in the soft white blanket, her face pale but determined. "Maria, I have something to show you," Isabel said, her voice steady despite the overwhelming emotion that threatened to spill over. Maria's eyes, still red from crying, looked at her mother in confusion. "Mom, what is it?" Isabel gently placed the baby in Maria's arms, her hands trembling. "This is your daughter." Maria froze, her eyes widening in disbelief as she looked at the small child, her heart still heavy with the grief of losing one child, but now filled with a strange, hopeful wonder at the baby that was now cradled in her arms. It was an impossible reality, one that was too surreal to fully understand. The baby opened her eyes and looked up at Maria, as if recognizing her. Maria's heart swelled as she whispered Valentina. It was a name that meant strength, courage. It was a name for the baby she had fought so hard for. But this child, this unexpected child, was so much more than just a name. Maria gazed down at the tiny face in her arms, a mother's love surging through her despite the uncertainty and confusion. It didn't matter how this child had come into the world. All that mattered was that she was here, and she would grow up surrounded by love, by hope, and by a family that would never let her go. And though the truth of this story would take time to fully understand, Maria knew one thing for sure: this was a miracle. And she would fight, with everything she had, to make sure this miracle was cherished forever. The revelation that changed everything. The hospital room felt quieter than ever, filled with the soft hum of machines and the steady rhythm of Maria's breathing. She cradled the baby in her arms, feeling the weight of what had just transpired. The shock, the confusion, the overwhelming grief, all of it still lingered in the corners of her mind, but something had shifted. In the small bundle in her arms, Maria could sense a flicker of something real, something she hadn't allowed herself to believe in for so long: hope. Isabel had just left the room, her face pale but carrying the weight of something that Maria couldn't yet understand. The baby, still wrapped in the soft white blanket, blinked up at her with wide eyes, and in that moment, everything seemed to fall into place. Maria looked at the tiny face before her, at the soft features and delicate, tiny fingers, and wondered how it was possible. How was it that she was holding a new child, one that wasn't her own yet, but felt so deeply intertwined with her heart? As she gazed down at the baby, her mind replayed the events that had led up to this moment. Her hopes, her dreams, and the unbearable pain of losing the baby they had waited for. And yet here, in her arms, was life. A miracle, yes, but how had it happened? Maria knew that the truth was unfolding, layer by layer, but how much of it was she truly ready to face? The sound of footsteps echoed outside the room, and Maria turned her head toward the door. She wasn't expecting anyone, and yet, when it opened, her heart skipped a beat. Dr. Salgado entered, his face lined with the exhaustion of a long day. There was something different in his eyes now, something that hinted at understanding, but also a lingering weight. "Maria," he began, his voice softer than it had been earlier. "We need to talk." Maria's chest tightened as she braced herself for what was coming. She didn't want to know. The truth was too much. But as much as she wanted to push it away, Maria knew that it would all come to light soon enough. And so, she nodded silently, urging Dr. Salgado to continue. "You've been through so much today," he said, his voice heavy with compassion. "And I don't want to overwhelm you with more, but what I'm about to say, it's important, Maria. It's crucial that you understand the full story. For your sake, for Valentina's." Maria's heart clenched as she heard the baby's name. It was the name she had chosen for the child she had hoped for. And now, it was this new child's name too. "What's going on?" Maria whispered, her voice trembling. "Why do I feel like there's more to this than I can understand?" Dr. Salgado took a deep breath, looking at her with a mixture of care and uncertainty. "There's something you need to know, Maria. Something about this baby. Something that goes deeper than what we thought." At that moment, the door opened again. This time, it was Isabel. She stepped in quietly, her eyes avoiding Maria's, her hands wringing nervously. Maria looked at her, confusion turning into concern. Isabel didn't look like herself, her face pale and her posture rigid, as if she was bracing for something monumental. "Isabel?" Maria asked, her voice soft, yet laced with a quiet urgency. "What's going on? What's happening?" Isabel finally met her gaze, and Maria could see the pain in her eyes. "Maria," she said softly, "you deserve the truth." Dr. Salgado stepped forward, his eyes lowering to the baby in Maria's arms. He seemed to hesitate, as though searching for the right words, but Isabel spoke first. "Maria, the baby you're holding, she's not your biological daughter. She's Valentina, but not in the way you think." Maria's heart raced. The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet, and she felt as though her breath had been taken away. Not my biological daughter. Her mind couldn't process it. She had just cradled the child, felt the warmth of her tiny body in her arms, whispered the name that had been meant for the baby she lost. And now this. Isabel's voice trembled as she continued. "The baby we thought was gone. She wasn't really gone. When you went under anesthesia, we took another baby. one who had been abandoned, one whose mother had signed the adoption papers. A child who was meant for another family. Maria's world stopped. "No," Maria whispered, her voice barely audible. "That's not possible. How could you? How could you make that decision?" Isabel reached for Maria's hand, her touch gentle but firm. "Maria, we didn't want you to lose everything. Not again. You fought so hard. When I saw that baby, I knew that she was meant to be yours, that you were meant to be her mother. It was the only thing I could do to protect you, to save you from more heartbreak." Dr. Salgado stepped back, allowing the words to sink in. "Maria, the adoption was legal. There was nothing unlawful about what happened, but it was never meant to replace the child you lost. It was only meant to help you heal." The weight of Isabel's words hit Maria like a tidal wave. She felt her chest tighten, the air getting thick with the understanding that she had been living in a world of half-truths. This baby, this sweet, fragile little girl, wasn't the daughter she thought she was holding. And yet, everything in her heart told her that this baby, Valentina, was hers. The love she felt for her was undeniable, a bond stronger than anything she had imagined. She looked down at the baby, now peacefully sleeping in her arms. How could something that started with such betrayal, such secrecy, feel so right? Maria's heart swelled with conflicting emotions. Anger, confusion, and love, all warring inside her. She had been kept in the dark, but now she could finally see the truth, no matter how painful it was. And yet, in this moment, Maria knew she had to make a choice that would affect her for the rest of her life. Would she allow the truth to tear her apart, to overshadow the life she could still build with Valentina, or would she embrace the miracle before her, no matter how it had arrived? Tears welled in her eyes as she leaned down and kissed Valentina's forehead, whispering softly, "You are mine. You will always be mine." The room fell silent. No one spoke, but the bond in that moment, the bond between a mother and her child, was more powerful than any revelation, any betrayal. It was the beginning of something new, a fresh start in the face of overwhelming adversity. Dr. Salgado and Isabel watched quietly, understanding that Maria had made her choice. It wasn't about blood. It wasn't about biology. It was about love, the unbreakable, unconditional love of a mother. And in that moment, Maria knew the truth. Valentina was her daughter, and nothing would ever change that. A mother's unbreakable bond. Maria sat in the quiet hospital room, the evening light filtering softly through the blinds, casting long shadows across the floor. Her heart was full, but her mind still raced. She hadn't expected the revelations that had come to light, the betrayal, the secrets that had been kept from her. But as she looked down at the baby in her arms, she felt a peace that she couldn't explain. Valentina, the baby she had never expected to hold, was hers now, hers in every way that mattered. As she stared at her, Maria felt a deep connection, a bond stronger than blood. It was as if all the pain, the years of struggle, and the heartbreak had led to this moment. In this child, she saw not just the miracle of life, but also the strength to carry on. Valentina had become her symbol of resilience, a new beginning after loss. Hours passed, and the weight of the day slowly began to lift. Carlos had stayed by her side, his eyes still red from the intensity of the day's events. Maria felt him watching her, his gaze filled with love, but also a quiet understanding. They had both been through so much, and now they were beginning to rebuild, piece by piece, with the little girl in her arms as the starting point. The door to the room opened quietly, and Isabel stepped inside. She had been the one to make the difficult decision, the one who had kept the secret for so long, but now she stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. Maria's eyes locked onto her, a silent question hanging in the air between them. "Maria," Isabel said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, "I know you must hate me for what I did." Maria shook her head, her fingers gently caressing Valentina's small hand. "No," she replied firmly. "I don't hate you. I don't know what to feel yet, but I don't hate you. You did what you thought was best for me, for Valentina, and in a way, you gave me a chance I thought I had lost forever." Isabel's eyes welled with tears, and she stepped closer to Maria's side. "I couldn't bear the thought of you losing another child. The pain I saw in your eyes when you lost her, it haunted me. I couldn't let you face that again. But I realize now, I can't take away the truth. I can't hide it from you forever." Maria looked up at Isabel, a sadness in her own eyes now, but there was no anger there. She knew that Isabel had acted out of love, even if the path had been paved with secrecy and pain. She reached out, gently placing her hand on Isabel's. "Thank you," she said quietly. "But the truth is, it's not about how this baby came to me. It's about the fact that she's here, and I'm going to love her, no matter what. I'm going to make sure she knows she's mine. That's all that matters." Isabel nodded, a tear escaping down her cheek as she leaned in, kissing Maria's forehead. "I'm so sorry for everything, Maria. You're stronger than I could ever be." Maria smiled softly, looking down at Valentina once more. She had a lifetime ahead of her to share with this little girl, and that was what mattered. She didn't know what the future held, or what more secrets might be waiting to come to light. But one thing was certain: Valentina was her daughter, and nothing could change that. As the days passed, the hospital room became a place of quiet healing. Maria held Valentina close, every moment feeling like a gift. The weight of the past seemed to fade as the new life in her arms grew stronger, and each small milestone, a first smile, a soft coo, a gentle grasp of her finger, reminded her that she had been given another chance at motherhood. Carlos was beside her every step of the way, supportive and loving, though the shadow of the truth still hung in the air between them. They both knew that things would never be the same, but that didn't mean their bond was broken. Together, they would move forward. Together, they would build a life filled with love for the daughter they had both yearned for. One evening, as the sky outside turned a deep shade of purple, Carlos sat beside Maria, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. They were alone, in the quiet of their home, with Valentina sleeping peacefully in her crib. The silence was comfortable, filled with the warmth of their presence and the soft sounds of their daughter's breathing. Maria looked at Carlos, her heart full. "Do you think we made the right choice?" she asked quietly. "I know it's been hard, but do you think we're doing the right thing for her?" Carlos turned to her, his expression filled with certainty. "I think the right thing is always the one that leads to love. And we love her, Maria. That's all that matters." Maria smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. It was a tear of acceptance, of peace, of finally feeling whole again. No matter how Valentina had come into their lives, she was theirs, and nothing could take that away. As the years passed, Maria and Carlos raised Valentina in their home, surrounded by love, and with a quiet understanding of the complexity of their journey. Valentina grew into a strong, independent young woman, carrying with her the legacy of resilience and hope that Maria had instilled in her from the very first day. And though the truth of how Valentina came into their lives would always remain a part of their story, it never defined them. It was only one chapter in the book of their lives, a book filled with love, courage, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child. Maria had been given another chance, not just to love again, but to rebuild, to heal, and to show the world that love isn't defined by blood, but by the strength of the heart. And as she looked at Valentina, growing stronger with each passing day, she knew that the love they shared would always be enough to carry them through any challenge that lay ahead. The story wasn't over, it had just begun. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.